The opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host and guests and don't necessarily reflect the views of WOWT.
They start off with a disclaimer saying that the views aren't necessarily those of station management. And hey, you know what? I don't think I'm going to tick anybody off, but you never know. We'll have to wait and see. The podcast is brought to you by Havana Garage. Havana Garage on the Old Market. If you've lived in Omaha any length of time, you know about Havana Garage. You've probably been to Havana Garage, and go again. There's so much going on in downtown. You got all the activities, all the plays and the concerts and the restaurants and everything else is going on. Go and enjoy a nice time, relaxing time. Have a cigar, have a cocktail at Havana Garage in the Old Market. All right, this is going to be a good podcast today. I'm looking forward to this. My guest is former State Senator Tom Brewer. Let me give you just some background here. He was in the Army for 36 years. He was awarded both the Bronze Star and 2 Purple Hearts. He went to Afghanistan and trained the Afghan National Army, where he was shot 6 times. He's been going to Ukraine since 2022, visiting the front line. You know, a lot of times these politicians go to Ukraine and they do a nice little photo op. Oh, here I am, you know. No. This man's on the front line. He's also assisted in training in armed forces in Ukraine, and I'm just getting the tip of the iceberg. Go to his Wikipedia page and find out more. Senator, thanks for joining me here. This is you're an interesting man.
Well, thanks for having me. And, it's one of those where I've just kind of lived life and things have happened the way they have. I don't ever really look back on things and question why it happened that way. It just sometimes that's where you are when things happen.
Okay, so you were in the Army for 36 years. You're a Ranger. I see from your shirt there, you're a Ranger. You've seen a lot of action. You've seen a lot of action, a lot of war action. You've been shot numerous times. Why do you still keep going to the front lines?
Well, in this case, it's where they need the help. I mean, that's where Ukraine is trying to hold back the Russian army, and a lot of the weapon system that were given to them are new to them. Most of what they had before the war started was Soviet-type weapons, and so there's a desire to make sure that they are able to properly use these different weapon systems we give them, and I think the American taxpayer would want us to make sure that they were able to use the systems. And in addition to that, there's just a lot of things that are happening over in Ukraine that people need to know about, and so I try and be the conduit to share the experiences, whether it be, the indiscriminate missile attacks and drone attacks all night, to the need for everything from VA support, because they have about 11,000 people that have lost limbs, and they don't have the ability to replace those limbs. And so we're trying to find places that have limbs. They may be an older generation, but it's still a functional. I mean, even for some of them to have a hook. Like if you remember back when we were younger, that was really common to see guys that get their hand in a baler or something like that. But for them, that's huge. They might be able to work if they had that limb. Without the limb, they're pretty limited. So we're trying to bring together resources to help them as best we can while the war is going, and then help them also figure out how to win that war, and then along the way tell some of the stories.
I want to get to about winning the war later on down the line, but before we get to that point, I paid a lot of attention to the news. And I see whatever coverage comes out this way. What am I missing? What are you seeing that's not being reported?
Well, I think we need to go back to the start. When the war started, all of NATO and the United States was hesitant to give them much. We had the Javelin missiles, which were very effective, but it is a shoulder-fired missile. And if you're going up against large hordes of Russians, that's good to kill a tank, but you still have hundreds of people with guns that are going to try and make your day difficult. So what happened was there was a push to give them everything. We started with just armored personnel carriers and some tanks, and gradually worked up to weapon systems like HIMARS. These are rocket systems, the HIMARS is, and it's very effective. It has bomblets, and so you can take out a whole grid square and everybody in it. So we gradually gave them that stuff over the years, but they needed it and could have won the war within the first 4 or 5 months had they had that, because the Russian army was truly a paper tiger. They had incompetent leadership. They had sold off a lot of spare parts, everything from spare tires to some of their oils and fuels and things like that they needed. And they didn't realize till the war started, which again they thought would be over in a couple of days, that they were even going to need this. And then when it came time for them to replace the tires on these trucks that all of a sudden blew up because they've been setting for 20, 30 years and nobody had driven the truck, and the sidewalls get brittle and then they give out and there's no spare. Well, as they went to the warehouse and found them empty, they tracked down some of the leadership that sold this stuff off and all the things that came with that. But it was an army that was unprepared for war. Whereas the Ukrainian army had been at war since 2014 because they started their war process back when Russia invaded Crimea and took it. And then, if you remember right, the whole battle in the Donbass started because what they were doing are taking Russian soldiers, putting them in a generic uniform, calling them little green men, and then sending them across. Well, they were actually Spetsnaz. They were some of their very best trained, and they gave the Ukrainians a heck of a fight. But the Ukrainians held and fought well, but it was on a much smaller scale than it is now. So, they had a distaste and a dislike for the Russians clear back to 2014, and even before that, when they had to work with them.
Well, you say they have a distaste for the Russians, but aren't there parts of Ukraine that Russia's trying to take over that want to be part of Russia?
I don't believe so. What they did is they did a poll after they took over these regions, and Crimea was one of them, and they said, are you Russian speaking? And that was a criteria they used on whether or not they wanted to be Russian. They were Russian speaking, but it didn't mean they wanted to be Russian. And especially in places like Crimea, where if you look through history, they slaughtered the Tartars, which the Tartars were, they came from Turkey. They were Muslim, but they were kind of not radical Muslim, and that was their religion. That's where they went to church. And so they had no love for him. The Ukrainians didn't have much love for him. Most of the population that was in Crimea were retired naval officers. Because of Sebastopol, the big naval base there, they'd retire and they'd stay there because it is the Florida of the Ukraine, the white sand beaches, and it's a beautiful area and a lot of castles and things that survived there, where in other parts of Europe they didn't survive because of World War II. So I would guarantee that if you were to take a poll and you were honestly to have people say, do you want to be part of Russia? Or you want to be part of Crimea, of Ukraine? They would want to be part of Ukraine. Now that poll was taken after they purged a lot out, because remember when they took over part of the Donbass and the war started, there was about 6 million that were forced to leave, and many of them ended up in the United States or other parts of Europe. So that population would have been counted in that. And then the Russian-speaking part again, Russian was the forced language. So a lot of them that spoke Russian doesn't mean they're Russian. It just means that was the language that they grew up with.
A lot of Americans speak Spanish or Chinese or whatever. Doesn't mean that they want to live in China or Mexico or wherever it might be.
So the Donbass, I believe, may be a lost land in the sense that it will ever be part of Ukraine again, because they purged the Ukrainians out. The ones that are left are probably more Russian-leaning, just because that's the only ones that could survive. If you were pro-Russia, pro-Ukrainian, you were going to be terminated in one way or another. What they're doing in the contested area there is they have policed up the children, and I want to say it's like 15 and younger, and about 19,000 of them have just been relocated into Russia, sort of a foster care kind of thing that turns into a permanent home for them. And they're trying to take the Ukrainian out of the Ukrainian there, and kind of what they used to do with Native Americans, I think, with the Indian schools. And they're just gone. They took their passports. Their family don't know what happened to them. And so there's just a lot of stories out of this area that once you understand them, you can see why there's such a dislike between the two. And I don't know that will heal anytime soon. I just think that they have lost so many daughters and sons to the war that it's going to be really hard to ever get back to where they were.
Yeah, I find it hard to believe that they would just roll and say, "Oh, okay, all forgiven, my bad," and then move on. Let me ask you, why should Americans really care about any of this? Why should Americans care about sending money to Ukraine, care about what happens to Ukraine? Why is this important to us?
Well, that's a great question, and I have been hit with that question 100 times, I think. And what I tell them is that if you understand the country, it is Iowa or eastern Nebraska, the size of Texas. And it is this huge farming community everywhere you go that has got the darkest soil I've ever seen anywhere on the planet, and pretty efficient farmers. They produce everything for Asia, Central Asia, and North Africa, along with Europe. And that's a factor that has to be weighed into this, because right now the real strength that Putin has is his oil and his ability to influence whether or not Europe will have natural gas in the winter or not, things like that. Imagine if he also had the ability to determine whether or not they had food. You'd control people's ability to drive and heat their house and eat. It's not long, you own them one way or the other. And that's exactly what he will do. Now, in addition to that, if Ukraine's lost, there will be 27 airports that he will gain, 11 naval port facilities that he'll gain. I mean, you look at all of the things that he will gain, and then you think about the, tens and hundreds of billions that we spent in Iraq and Afghanistan, and really ended up doing that and having nothing when it was all done and said, and the number of folks that we lost, the amount of equipment that's been given to the Taliban. I mean, it goes on and on. If we lose Ukraine, we would lose all the equipment that we've given them, plus all of that they had, which was considerable, and all that the Europe has given them. And if you look at that, that's probably the equivalent of the amount of stuff that Russia had to begin with in the first place. So losing Ukraine, if you look at the food, if you look at the facilities that would be gained, and you looked at the sheer manpower that would, because all of those that would be in the Ukraine would then be drawn into the Russian army. So, you would have the best trained army in the world being meshed with probably one of the better trained armies in the world. They started as a real mess, but they have got better. And Russia is not a bad army right now. And that's where Europe needs to fear them, is that Russia would probably make short works of NATO right now, with the exceptions of the Americans. And even the Americans, we don't have that many combat-trained soldiers left anymore. Some of our senior NCOs and senior officers, but for the most part, we've got a lot of folks that are not wearing combat patches, where you have an army in the Ukraine and in Russia that has fought day in and day out, and they understand the new way of fighting.
Do we run the risk of putting troops on the ground there, boots on the ground in Ukraine, and then do we run the risk then of Ukraine becoming just another Vietnam?
If it happened that way, I think it's possible. But right now, unless something changes, and I met with the embassy folks while I was over there, there is no plan to move any U.S. troops over there. I will tell you that these new weapon systems that we give them, they do get training on them. It is not active duty U.S. military personnel training them, but they are experts, and I can't really go into a lot more detail than that, but it does just suffice to say that they're being very well trained on these air defense systems or whatever that particular piece of equipment we're giving them is, Patriot being the primary one. But we've had time to train them, and they're very bright. As a matter of fact, when it comes to technology, I think in ways the Ukrainians are brighter than we are, because you can see them do things. They MacGyver everything, but they MacGyver it really well.
You say you can't go into detail on that, which then begs the question, CIA, private, like was it BlackRock? That was
Blackwater.
Blackwater, yeah. People like that are doing the training. Who's doing the training if it's not the military?
It's folks that are contracted to do it who have a level of expertise. I would say that the majority of them are former military, and they have to be very careful about how they do it, where they do it, because the Russians would like nothing more than to make them go away. And the Russians have got accuracy down on some of their systems. The new generation of Shiad missiles, the hypersonic missiles. You can pick a spot, and they can destroy it. And that's why you have to have a lot of OPSEC security. If you're running an underground factory that produces drones, you definitely don't want to give a signature of having trucks back up and unload and things like that, because they'll see it in the satellite, and it won't be long, and the place will blow up.
President Trump has sort of been all over the map when it comes to Ukraine. All right, and now he's giving, yeah, you're smiling like maybe I'm being polite when I say that, but yes, he's been all over the map on this administration. How does that affect the Ukrainian people? How does that affect our activities in Ukraine if they don't know if the U.S. has their back or not on any given day?
Well, I think they kind of settled into a battle rhythm with President Biden and realized that they were going to be able to receive, and at a certain level, the things they really needed, like the ATACMS, wasn't part of it until literally just a few days before he left office. He finally blessed off and let him use the ATACMS. The difference between the MRLS, which is the smaller rocket, and that has a range of 70 miles, and the ATACMS, which is 350, is the difference between a 250-pound warhead and a 3,000-pound warhead, or 2,500, something like that. So much bigger warhead, much more accurate, and much more range. And they needed that, but we wouldn't give it to them. The part that they're struggling with now is they have these weapon systems. They need spare parts because everything breaks. And they need ammunition. And as soon as he came in, the Secretary of Defense put a hold on everything. And I don't think the president knew about it. And, I don't know. I'm not a great fan of the current Secretary of Defense, because I just think he's too young and inexperienced to understand the complexities and depth of a lot of the things that are happening. And he's making quick decisions that are hurting the country and those involved that we're trying to help also. And Ukraine's a great example of that. So then they shut off, and it wasn't just materials. And they had stuff in Poland on trains coming across, and they stop it, which I think is ridiculous.
They being who?
U.S. Department of Defense.
So we stopped it. Okay.
We stopped it, right. Which I think is ridiculous. On the train, get it moving, because all you do is you give them time to find it on a satellite photo and then blow it up when it comes across. So you're not doing anybody a favor by doing that. But there was a lot of knee-jerk stuff that happened in the early days of the administration when it came in. Now, the other thing that hurt is they held up the imagery. Well, Ukraine doesn't have satellites. So if they don't go to us or the Brits, they don't know what's going on across the border. And that's huge. That's the majority of the kills they've got deep into Russia have all been off those satellite images. And those were held up, but that was about a week. And the Russians gained about 200 square kilometers of ground in that week, because they didn't know where they were coming. They didn't know how many. They didn't know how to defend it. So that hurt. They had about 3 times the casualties during that period of time. So, a bad decision cost them land. It cost them men and women that are on the battlefield, and it was unnecessary, because once Trump figured it out, he said, no, let's get things going again, and they did. Now, it was just continuing the flow of stuff that Biden had committed as part of that big package they got. Mm-hmm. But that's okay. That's the stuff they needed, not a big deal. The problem is that's going to run out at some point, and then they need a reset. And that was what was kind of in question. Well, we get spare parts or we get ammunition. And that was up and down. And then most recently, he's made the decision that Russia is not honestly in this fight to have a ceasefire and be reasonable about how they're going to handle this. They want to gain back every inch of ground they can. They want to kill as many as they can. And all we do is put it off. That's why when I heard he said, well, we're going to do 50 days, I cringed because, that's 50 days of missiles landing all over the place and people dying, mostly civilians. And it's unnecessary. If what we're going to do now is the same as in 50 days, then let's do it. And when I say do it, sanctions. Take the price of oil that they're allowed to get and bring that down to $45 a barrel. You'll break their economy. And that's how, if you look at how the czars have collapsed and the Soviet Union collapsed, was on their economies collapsing. And that's the real weakness they have. You don't want to fight the Russian bear to the last man and win that way. You want them to collapse from within. And they were working toward that. And I think that's still a possibility. But they need to enforce the sanctions. They need to get rid of this ghost fleet of tankers that bring oil out illegally. They need to come down hard on the countries that's providing the resources that helps them to build the drones that destroy the buildings and kill the people. There's this direct effect. And if you think about just for a second, why should we support Ukraine if their friends are the North Koreans, the Iranians, Chinese? Maybe we need to be thinking about making sure that we see the other side of that and are the ones that are defending democracy. And there's flaws in their democracy, don't get me wrong, but they went from being part of the Soviet Union. They started, and the place was infested with Russians that were shaping everything, and they were corrupt, they were stealing money, there were all these problems. And they've had 2 revolutions where they have overthrown the government, forced out, and they're in a much better place now. I'm not saying there isn't corruption at all. I've been over there, and I've seen where, some of the things now is as little as, if you want to get a contract with someone, well, to have it delivered will cost you some extra money, things like that. Where it used to be they'd take half the earnings of the company or something like that. But they're gradually working out this Soviet component of everything. But for them to survive as a nation, we have to step in. And if you lose Ukraine, you will empower Russia, and you will make sure that China will invade Taiwan because they can see they can do it and get away with it. What needs to happen is give them the resources they need to hold that line and defeat the Russians in every way possible on the line without having to lose a tremendous number of soldiers. And then the other part of that, sanctions to collapse their economy.
Now, from all accounts, the Ukrainian people are behind Zelensky and fighting, right? I mean, I'm sure there are those that aren't, but for the most part, the Ukrainian people are behind the war effort. Would that be accurate to say?
Yeah, I have not run into any that will step away and say, I want to be Russian, I don't want to be here. I think they left early on in the first few days after the war started.
Okay. What about the Russian citizens? Are they behind Putin on this? Is their spirit behind it, or is this just these soldiers who are doing what they're told to do? Otherwise, they're going to end up in prison or whatever it might be. What's the attitude over there?
Another great question.
I try. I've been doing this a few years. I get lucky once in a while.
Well, you've been hitting them out of the park here. So here's the way it is. If you're a mother and you've got a son or sons that are serving, they come up missing, because unlike America and really all the countries of NATO I know of, the policy of no man left behind, that isn't living. That's dead too. No man's left behind.
Right.
And they don't have that. When I was in Bakhmut, and Bakhmut was the front lines, I mean, literally looking across, you could see the Russians, and the Russians could see you, and there were literally thousands of dead bodies, and the stench was unbelievable, and they just leave them, and it's medieval the way that it's done, but it's the reality of the situation there. If you complain, you'll end up in Siberia, and you'll be gone. And
how do you survive that? In other words, I mean, I can't imagine, maybe I'm a coward, whatever, but I can't imagine being on the front line, being shot at, worrying about my own life and safety, and then seeing all these dead bodies out there. When you finally get home, and how do you deal with that's got to be very a major PTSD to something like that.
Well, for me, I don't know. The PTSD issue isn't maybe as big a factor as just dealing with. It's harder when it's, when I was in command and I lost troops in Afghanistan. You had to do the contact of the family. You had to help do the ramp ceremony where you brought the body to the aircraft, flew them back, and then you met the family at Dover, and then you had the services. That wears on you horribly in the sense that it's someone and you get to meet the family and all this. Here, you're removed a little bit because, it's a different location, But to see the forward stabilization points, and these are underground. Imagine an underground, this was literally a potato cellar, but it was a potato cellar probably 60 feet by 50 feet, a big one. Mm-hmm. And it was an operating room, but it was also where they treated burns. They did all kinds of stuff there. And it was being shelled to where you would have dust coming down and you'd have the whole earth shaking. So the Russians knew where it was, but they couldn't hammer it hard enough for the layer of ground and timbers and stuff they had above it. But it was the first time that I had been in an operating room since I had been in an operating room. And in 2012, I was blown up by a rocket-propelled grenade. And so you spend a lot of time in a hospital as they dig out all the parts and pieces from that. And I was worried about the reporter that was with me, that he wouldn't be able to handle the smells and the sights and all that. It wasn't until I got in there that it was me that probably was struggling a lot more than anyone else because you just hadn't had that experience since you were the one on the gurney. Mm-hmm. So I struggled with that. But in Bakhmut, what I saw was the Russians sacrificing wave after wave of men, and they just didn't care. Well, we lucked out in the Minister of Intelligence, a guy named Budanov, who's a good friend. He took a liking to me on my first trip over there in the spring of 2022 when the war started. And every time I come there, he wants to see me, and every time I go there, he makes sure that there's a higher than average chance I'm going to survive because he'll say where to go and where not to go and things like that because he truly wants to see you survive this experience of going to the Ukraine. He said, we have 3 prisoners of war mm-hmm. that have just been captured. They have not gone through our debriefing process. They have not been processed into our POW ranks yet. Would you like to speak to them before we bring them back? And I said, yes, I would. And so those 3 were brought to a basement in a house, and it was just a regular civilian house, like kind of ratty old, mm-hmm. 1920s, 30s home. And we went down in the basement, and we did an interview. And the first guy was from Indonesia, and he had volunteered to come to Russia as a agronomist. He was going to work on some ag projects. He came there under all of these agreements that he had. At the airport, they met him. They took his passport. They sent him off to a week of training, and then they threw him on the front. And he was knocked unconscious in an explosion, and the Ukrainians policed him up, and that's how he ended up there. And he was in tears, just wanting to go back to Indonesia. He said, I don't dislike Ukrainians. I just had no choice. I either win or I died. Well, then they brought in an NCO, a sergeant, who said that he had been drafted out of a city in the Urals. He said if you were to go down the ranks, he says the majority of the people you saw are going to be from Siberia, they're going to be from the Urals, they're going to be from all of the border, what we call oblasts or states that surround, but they're not from Moscow and they're not from St. Petersburg. That's the thing that he was stressing. And how angry they were that it's the youth from the countryside that has to die and not the youth from the city because they had money. And then the last one we talked to was a captain. Same thing with him. He'd been knocked unconscious in an explosion, got captured, and he was a completely different breed of cat because he said if you turn me loose now, I will kill you. And he says, if they trade me for prisoners, I'll come back and I'll kill them. And I mean, he had been so programmed, he had one thing in mind, and that was to kill as many Ukrainians as he possibly could. And so you see that kind of broad spectrum of what's in the Russian army. Mm-hmm. And the hardcore ones, I think they're going to do whatever Putin tells them, but there's a chance that the ones in the middle, if the right person had the ability to have an uprising, they might come apart.
Are the North Koreans still there?
They are. Initially, it was about 12,000 of them. About 6,000 of them have ended up in a body bag. And the other are still there. There's talk now of moving them out of the Kursk region, which is Russia proper, across the border, and then have them come to the front and fight inside of Ukraine. Now, originally, they were going to do that. They were going to keep them in Russia. But North Korea has offered up another 30,000 soldiers. That 30,000 will make a difference in the front.
I got to tell you now. Of course, I've never been in the military. I've never been in war. I have a lot of respect for veterans. My dad was World War II vet and everything, so I have a lot of respect for that. But the way I just can't fathom the way that you just casually talk about 6,000 in a body bag. Maybe I've just led such a sheltered life. I don't know. That just seems, for me, that would just be like completely mind-boggling. And you make it sound like I'm going to the store for a pack of cigarettes.
Well, just so you have a reference here, while I was over there, we were tracking the number of casualties, Russian casualties per day, and they're averaging about 1,300 to 1,900 casualties a day. So they will lose in one day what we lost in Afghanistan in 20 years. I mean, and imagine that they're over 1 million casualties right now. If you take everyone that we lost in World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and all the way up to now, and all those wars put together, we didn't lose that many soldiers. And that's how many Russia's lost in 3.5 years.
Okay, I want to ask you about, can Ukraine win this thing? But first, I got to make a quick comment about my friends over at Havana Garage on the Old Market. Havana Garage, they got a great humidor there. You can enjoy a nice cigar, whatever you like, something mild, maybe something with a little bit more of a punch to it. They got that. They got a great whiskey selection. I myself am a Scotch drinker. They got some nice Scotches there. But they've also got just a nice atmosphere, a place you can go and relax and talk and have a conversation and just enjoy yourself. If you're in the Old Market, you're going downtown for maybe a nice dinner in the Old Market on a weekend night, or maybe, like I said, you're going to one of the concerts or the events down there at the CHI, make Havana Garage part of your event. Make Havana Garage part of your evening. Havana Garage in the Old Market. Okay, so $1 million question. Can Ukraine win this thing, or is this just going to keep on dragging on until Russia gets frustrated and drops the bomb?
Well, I don't think Russia will drop the bomb for a number of reasons. One is they have done a very poor job of maintaining their nuclear fleet of options that they have. So they've, of course, got the rockets that are launched from a portable launcher, which is a tactical nuke. So tactical nuke is Tom gets mad at somebody in Wahoo, and he's able to shoot a missile that will go over there. It'll destroy the town, but the farm ground around there and most of the rest of that will survive it. So it's a small nuke. It can be very effective if you're taking out a division headquarters or corps headquarters somewhere. And that fleet has not been well taken care of. They've had a couple of tests where they've blown up on the launcher when they tried to launch them. So there's some risk with this. They have the silo-based missiles, which tend to be more dependable, better protected, all of the above, but it's the same thing we have like in western Nebraska and Wyoming. That is a strategic weapon that means there's multiple reentry vehicles and you're going to destroy a lot. To go there means it's the end of time. It's Armageddon. And Putin knows that he's out of power. It's all over. Putin's worth billions and billions of dollars, but he's never going to spend that if he blows the place up. So I don't think that's on the agenda. Now, could there be some sequence of events where they actually launch one? Yeah, there could be, but I don't think so. I think they're so super cautious right now about that they're not going to do it because we have too many satellites watching. We know when they were launched and what weapon system was launched and all the above. So how do they win the war? Well, as we were talking, if we will implement the sanctions, I think their economy is tanking now. I mean, you got interest rates over 21%. Inflation is off the boards because they're paying soldiers so much money that is falsely inflating everything.
You're talking about Russia now.
Russian soldiers are getting paid. Yeah, Ukrainian soldiers. I don't know. I think a sergeant in the Ukrainian army gets $600 a month, so he's not going to get rich. But the Russians are getting $10,000, $15,000 bonuses just for signing up. Well, they're using a lot of the oil money for that, and it's an effective tool. And when you're in a population that doesn't have much money, you all of a sudden it's like you hit the lottery. But you also then blow up the economy in the sense that now everything is expensive and not everybody's making that kind of money. They're still making that wage of a Russian peasant, basically. And if you can affect the economy, if you can then give them the weapon systems they need to hit key targets. So why are they losing ground? They're losing ground because they're allowing the Russians to use these glide bombs. So a glide bomb, think of it as a dumb bomb, a 1,000-pound dumb bomb that has a thing that attaches to the back end of it. The fins kick out. It has a guidance system that will control the flaps on the back, and it will guide the bomb in pretty close. You know, you may not be able to hit the baseball stadium, but you're going to hit downtown. Well, what they're doing is they're just raining these down all over the front lines. Well, the Ukrainian soldiers in the front lines can only take so much of a beating. I mean, if you have a 1,000-pound bomb blow up anywhere close to you, it's going to rupture your eardrums and your eyes are going to bleed and you're going to hurt horribly. And you can only do that day after day after day for so long, and then they have to fall back. And that's what they're doing, is they're falling back and giving ground to the Russians. They're making them pay for every inch of it. But they have to be able to take these out, and to do that, they need systems like our Tomahawk missile, where they can strike the airfields where the bombers are launching from, so they can't go and release them. The other thing is they have to affect the drones that are coming in right now, because they're shooting 500 to 600 drones a night. They say they're going to do some 1,000 drone nights coming in the next few weeks. If they do that, they will gradually destroy Kyiv. Now, Kyiv is a big city, 4.5 million. And if they saturate, the air defense can only take so many targets coming in. What they'll do is they'll launch false drones, otherwise drones that are empty. They have no warhead in them. They'll let them shoot their Patriots up on these false targets and then have a second or third wave of the real things. And by then, the launchers are empty, and they can scream in and hit whatever they want to hit.
What I thought I was asking was kind of a yes or no question.
Oh.
Can Ukraine win this?
Yes.
With your answer, I'm almost getting the impression of like, who the hell knows? Would that be accurate?
Yeah, no, I want to say yes, because I think with the decision made recently by President Trump that those resources and the way he's approaching this with forcing the sanctions, I think will be the formula to win it. Now, I think it takes a while for all that to take effect. I think where you're looking at things maybe being in a place where it could have some closure is in the fall. About the time of the ice and the snow coming, I think the economy will be in a place, the deep strikes and the number of Russians lost will be in a place where they have to make a decision, because he will either have to go to a nationwide draft, which he hasn't done to this point. He's done selected drafts, or else they're not going to have the manpower.
Okay. Before I let you go, who's paying for all your trips? Is this coming out of your own pocket? Is it the military or somebody you can't say?
No. I pay for everything, and I paid clear back in 2002. Fortunately, both my kids got scholarships to college, so I had some money in savings, and I could have used it to go fly fishing in Montana or whatever. But there's a personal satisfaction in trying to help folks that are really in trouble. And when the dust settles and everybody looks back at a person's life, it ain't going to be how much time you spent fly fishing in Montana. It's did you make other lives a little better? And once you take money for these things, then you're beholden to whoever that is. And then, are you a lobbyist for some company? Are you're trying to get a contract to get money? But, as it is now, we go where we work with orphanages, we work with veterans, we work with the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Agriculture and try and help them, because we think that when the war is done and the rebuilding starts, there will be certain states, and hopefully Nebraska is one of them, who will benefit immensely, because Europe EU has set aside $30 billion to rebuild. Most of what they need is stuff we produce. Irrigation systems, tractors, grain bins, port facilities. This is all stuff that's in our wheelhouse. And so if the name Nebraska and what we have is there and no other state's there, we're in a unique position. So, maybe I'm just hopeful, but I think you got to position yourself so that there's the opportunity when the time comes. And I don't want to compete with 49 other states. I want to be in a position where they say, hey, we know, we trust, we like Nebraska. They've been part of helping us win the war, and we're going to be there for them.
I meant to ask you this earlier, and then I got busy with everything else you were saying, so engrossed in it. So last question here. We've gone through 2 different administrations during this war. Have you been in contact with the State Department on your trips? Do you talk to them? Do they debrief you? Do you have to get approval from them to go? And how have things changed between the 2 administrations?
Well, the first trip over in 2022, I stopped at the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv and desperately tried to get them to answer the door, and nobody would. Eventually, there was a guy that came out, and he presented his card, and he was the head of security for the embassy. And he said, there's no one here. They're all in Poland because of the danger. Mm-hmm. I said, all right, is there a number, a point of contact, email, something? And he shared that with me. I sent an email, and I just said, this is who I am, and this is where I'm going, and I need to keep you informed. And I didn't get a response. And so each trip I've gone, I've sent a message saying, listen, just for your information, Nebraska State Center coming over, this is kind of the list of things I want to do, this is the list of places I'm going to go. And I listed the front lines. As a matter of fact, on one of the trips, I listed a town in Russia just to see if anybody read the mail. And they didn't get back with me. So I kind of had an attitude that, State Department, they're busy, I understand that, but still, you need to keep track of your people if they're in the country, especially if the country's at war. This last trip, we had a chance to meet with the political officer, and he was super helpful in helping us to get linked up with the right people working agriculture issues, veterans issues, all this kind of stuff. And now we have a email correspondence going, and we have a 911 number to go to. And when we went forward to the front this time, he said, well, listen, here's the deal. We recommend you don't do that, but we also understand you're here to do things, so you do what you have to do. If something happens, we'll deal with it at the time. Otherwise, if you're injured, like for me, they would send me probably to Lamstel, Germany for treatment if you survive it. But a lot of the problems they're having over there right now is just the drone attacks and the sheer fact that if you get within 50 kilometers of the front and you're in a vehicle that looks, licky-chewy, like it's worth shooting, then you're probably going to get hit with a drone. So they actually coached on using an older vehicle, and so I guess it's kind of transitioned from no communications to where now we're in a good place where we can let them know what's going on and ask for help. And so I don't know if it's the change of the embassy staffing so much as we finally found someone in the embassy that would embrace us and help us. But we're in a much better place now, and the embassy has been helpful.
All right. I'll tell you, this has been fascinating. Because, I've seen you on the news, and you get a nice little, 8-second soundbite. And, State Senator Brewer is back from Ukraine, and here's what he had to say, blah, 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 boom, next story. This was interesting because, a lot of military talk. I'm sure people that are in the military or were in the military are going to be really fascinated with your conversation. I was fascinated, and I'm not a military guy, but it was still very interesting to hear a real life perspective about what's going on over there. And I agree, we do need to protect the democracy in Ukraine. We do need to make it so that those ports are still available. And that's so I agree. We need to protect NATO. I agree with all of that stuff. I just wish, there was as we were talking beforehand, I said, there's enough in this world for everybody. Yep. This is just so stupid. Work things out. Negotiate, figure things out. You don't need to be killing people. You don't need to be putting 6,000 people in a body bag in one day. But I'll get off my soapbox now and just say thank you very much for being here, sir. I do appreciate that. I appreciate you paying attention and listening to the podcast. Don't forget to like the Becca's Talking Facebook page, and subscribe to the Becca's Talking YouTube channel, and tell your friends about this. Spread the word about the Becca's Talking podcast, brought to you by the good folks at Havana Garage in the Old Market. Till next time, take care, and bye, y'all.